Well, good evening. Are we on? Sound like it on? There we go. Okay. Good to be with you. It's been a little while, but I'm always fun to come back and see you and be with the group here. It's a pleasure, mainly because I think because of my work I can never get down here when you're meeting, so yeah, I miss out on that. And but it's really nice to be here, and I'm really going to enjoy. I enjoyed studying for this and preparing for this subject here of part of the fruit of the Spirit, patience. There's a lot to be said about that, and we won't be able to say everything there is to be said. Let me introduce this by pointing out something that I think has been perplexing to me over the years, and just a few years ago, as I was studying this particular text, it really struck me as the way Paul went about this letter to the Galatians. He all the way through the book, of course, is dealing with false teachers that have come into the Galatian churches, and they have come in teaching the works of the law and salvation by works of the law. And because of that teaching and the forsaking of salvation through the Spirit and by faith, suddenly when he gets to chapter 5, he's made his point, he's proved his point, and then he turns around and goes off on how these people are involved in biting and devouring one another, and the works of the flesh, and they're obvious, and it seems the church is just inundated with these sinful things. And I kept thinking over the years that just doesn't make sense. Why would a church that seems to be so meticulous in following certain commandments in the law have such a problem with division and envy and strife and biting and devouring one another? And the answer to that is because of the way they went about their salvation look, and the way they looked at the process of being justified in God's sight. In the Galatians text and in the Romans text, you note that Paul uses this phrase, works of the law, or works, or justified by works, etc. Typically, we have grown up thinking that what the Jews were saying and what these Judaizers were saying, Old Testament law, and that's what you guys believe, and therefore your problem is you just need to get over into the New Testament. Well, actually, that's really not the case, and Paul shows that in Galatians when he gets especially to chapter 3, and he gives us the idea, just like Paul does in Romans, that the problem is they think that once you're circumcised and do certain particular works of the law, not all the law, in fact, Paul even says, you don't keep the whole law, you don't even keep most of the law. You're just concerned about being circumcised, doing the Sabbath day, having the festivals, doing, a few things like that make you Jewish, these outward things. It might be like us saying, well, if you ask maybe a Christian, so why do you think you're going to be saved? And maybe their answer might be something like, well, I was baptized and I go to church, and I even go Wednesday nights, and boy, that's, that counts, that's double counting. You get that, and so, and I'm nice to my neighbor, and that's why I think I'm going to go to heaven. And I would say, well, you believe in a salvation by works then. And what happens to the people of that day, and what has happened to us in our fellowship many times, is the reason for division and the reason for strife and envy and the reason for the works of the flesh is because each of us makes our own little list. So if I'm going to make a list of the things that I think I'm going to need to do that God's going to justify me, I'm going to make a list of those things I'm good at. And I'm going to look at you and wonder why you don't do the things that my list has. And you're going to look at me and say, I don't see why you don't do the things that's on my list. And you can see how that fosters a strife and envy and biting and devouring and all that. Because there's a matter of boasting here. There's a matter of arrogance. I've come to this level. This is the reason that Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount kept saying in chapter 5, you have heard that it was said, you shall not commit murder. But I'm telling you, if you hate your brother, you've already in danger of judgment. He raises the bar back to where it was. To make this really clear so we can set up our subject tonight, think of what John the Baptist told the Pharisees and Sadducees when they came to him for baptism in Matthew chapter 3 and verse 7. He says, do not think to yourselves that we have Abraham as our father. For God is able to raise up children to Abraham from these stones. Okay, did you catch that? They're just saying, hey, we descended from Abraham. Remember the rich man and Lazarus, that parable? Remember how the rich man is in torment and he goes, Father Abraham. Father, me, father, son, I'm in the lineage. I get to be saved. What am I doing over here? It's that kind of thing. So they, if you talk to monopoly terms, it's like they got a get out of jail free card because they were related to Abraham. And of course, Paul in Galatians 3 says, no, there's only one family. There's not two families. There is the family that comes through Christ who came from Abraham, and that's the seed and that's the offspring. My point being, when you're saved by faith, by loyalty to God and not by works, when you're saved by your trust in God through, as Paul would say, led by the Spirit, walk in the Spirit, saved through the Spirit. When you're saved that way, you recognize that there isn't anything you do that causes you to deserve to be saved, and that you're relying and putting your total, full confidence, as Peter would say in 1 Peter 1:13, you're putting your whole confidence in the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ and what Jesus has done for you. And when you do that, it's really hard to be pointing your finger at somebody else. It's really hard to start saying somebody else is falling short, because you're falling short and you're relying on the cause of what Jesus did for you. And it brings us all down to the same level, and it takes away the works of the flesh, which he says become obvious in a church, Galatians 5:19, and then that paves the way for being able to have the fruit of the Spirit produced from us. All right, secondly, fruit of the Spirit. And just in case, and he's probably already said it, Byron hasn't said this, it doesn't say fruits of the Spirit. It's fruit of the Spirit. Now, I'm sure a lot of you love pomegranates. And if you don't, there's something wrong with you. One pomegranate, open it up, and there's all kinds of these wonderful candies that God made, and you stuff as many as you can in your mouth and chomp down and near choke to death with the juice that comes out, and it's just God's candy. It's just marvelous, but it's one fruit. But it has all kinds of little beautiful candies inside the fruit. The fruit of the Spirit is not being produced if we're only patient. The fruit of the Spirit is not being produced if we're only gentle but not kind. The fruit of the Spirit is not produced by any one of these things to the exclusion of others, and then for us to start boasting, oh yeah, man, look at me, I'm really good at The fruit of the Spirit is all of this together. Now, how are you and I going to go about producing this? That is the interesting way of going about this. Now, and Byron alluded to this on Sunday. Are we going to try to say, okay, here's what I need to do. I need to start with these. This is the way I used to preach this series. I go, okay, I'm going to do a series of lessons on the fruit of the Spirit. I'm going to start with love, and next week I'll do joy, and then I'll do peace and patience and kindness. And every week it's, here's how you can become more loving, more joyful, more peaceful, more patient. Here's how you can do all this. Now, would you rather do it that way? Okay, I want you to really work on patience tonight. Now, the best thing to do to work on patience is go down to the local library and pick out as many self-help books as you can that tell you how to be a more patient person. Or maybe you could just go through life going, be more patient, stop being so upset. Try that the next time you're driving through Chattanooga. Be more patient. Or, God's way is this. The fruit doesn't come from you, the fruit comes from the Spirit. The Spirit is producing the fruit in you. So, well, how does that happen? It happens by you and I growing closer and closer to God, getting so close that we begin to see Him and all of His character qualities, and we see that and we begin to be transformed into that image. 2 Corinthians 3:18. We're looking into the glory of God. It's just like those of you who are married. The longer you hang out with each other, hopefully, if it's a good marriage, you become more and more like each other. Teresa drives me nuts. Why? Because she starts saying, why don't we do the blinds this way? Because when you put it that way, I can't reach the top one. So would you do the other side, so just bring it down so then I can reach it in the morning? Sure, honey, that'd be great. And when she's out of town, you know what I do? I pull it the same way she asked me to pull it, because she's influenced me so much. I start to go, I got to do it her way. And I pull it the other way, even though I can reach it. And that goes on throughout my life. Well, I know Teresa would do it this way, and even though she's gone, and I used to do, I got to do it her way. She never does it my way, but no, I'm just kidding. She does. She does all the time, more than I do, I'm sure. At any rate, see, it's always bad when your wife's here on a meeting. You can't say a lot of things you would normally say. But you can see that's the influence God's is supposed to have on us. It's far better to get to know Him and have that as a positive influence, so that being more patient, being more kind, being gentle comes out of who you have become inside, not just because you're going, oh, don't get angry. Pretty soon it becomes you. And moving in that direction is much easier. It's just like overcoming sin is not white knuckling and going, don't do it. It's growing to love God so much and love His Word so much and love what He's done for you so much, you don't want to do it. Because He's giving you a much better fruit to eat. He's giving you a much better diet. So I'm trying to set up then, since this is the first of the lessons, I'm trying to set up here then the approach of how we want to go about having God's fruit born in us. And that happens primarily by us moving to study our Bible to know Him, not just studying our Bible for rules and commandments and issues and things like that, which has been more of our tradition. Okay? All right. Let's now talk a little bit about this idea of patience here. And it's an interesting word in Scripture. In fact, there are actually two different Greek words that are translated, depending on your Bible and depending on the context, by different words. words like patience, endurance, perseverance, and steadfastness. And depending on your version, you will see all of those different words that are used. But there are two different Greek words. And in many cases, it seems to just say these words or use these words interchangeably, even though the Greek words are different. But there are some cases that are even used in the sentence itself. An example of this is in Colossians chapter 1 and verse 11 and 12, where Paul says, "May you be strengthened with all power according to his glorious might for all endurance and patience with joy." So you notice the word endurance and the word patience, and it's used in the same text here. Now, these are, again, two different Greek words, but they're very, very similar in how they are used and applied in Scripture. The first word, endurance, has to do with enduring trials and enduring suffering and being steadfast to the end. Though, in other words, it is you're thinking more on a long-term basis of getting from the beginning of your life to the end of your life and running the race and finishing the course and enduring the things that you're going to suffer in the meantime. Like the Hebrew writer in Hebrews chapter 10 stops his dissertation toward the end, and he says, "You have need of endurance." The Hebrew brethren were suffering trials and difficulties, and he says, you have need of endurance. You're ready to give up, and you need to get through this and understand that endurance is a key part of following Christ and living the Christian life. So that is the word that's used in that text and used in this Colossians text. But the word that we're interested in tonight is this word. This is the word that's used in the fruit of the Spirit list. And this has the idea of enduring evil, or more specifically, enduring evil people, being long-suffering toward others, having forbearance toward others. So that would make sense, wouldn't it, in the Galatian context? He is more there talking about our relationships with brethren, as he says, don't bite and devour one another, live with one another in love. And there's a lot of those sentences. So when he uses patience here, he uses the word that especially has to do with the idea of being long-suffering toward evil people, or toward people who are suffering you, causing you to suffer or feel like it. So it's more that long-term type of thing with individuals. Peter uses that in 2 Peter 3 and verse 9 when he says, the Lord is not slow about his promise, but is long-suffering or patient, some versions, toward you, not wishing that any should perish. So the Lord is, same word, patient or long-suffering toward us and toward the world, because he's not willing that any should perish. Sometimes people ask the question, why doesn't God do something about all this? Why doesn't he return? He's long-suffering. He's patient toward even the most evil people, hoping and desiring that everybody would come to repentance. All right, so if we take that and apply that, then we see what kind of people we ought to be toward one another. And notice what we're doing. We're reflecting what God does. We're looking at how God does patience, and then we're reflecting that. He gives us the strong motivation to learn patience by seeing how he has been patient with us and patient with the world. I think one of the better ways to understand patience is to think about impatience and think about what that means. Notice in this text that he actually says that you are to be patient, you are exercise patience with joy. So consider, if you're going to exercise patience with joy, then what is it if you're not joyfully patient? I'm usually, if I'm patient, and it just so happens that this is probably my worst one of the fruit of the Spirit. This is the one I struggle with more than just about anything else, as far as being sometimes patient with people. And the reason it's hard is not because maybe I can't rein it in. It's because he asked me to be patient with joy. Well, I'm not happy about it. I'm not thrilled about this. And if we're not patient with joy, then it's not patience. It's kind of like you tell your kid, why don't you go up and clean your room? And they grumbling all the way up to go to their room. And you say, see how obedient my kid is? No, he's not obedient at all. He's griping the whole time. That's not obedient. Can you imagine us obeying God that way? Told me to do this, I ain't gonna do it. No, he's asking us to do this then with joy. The interesting thing about that then is to see how when we're not doing this with joy, this impatience is the idea of us not being happy about the position God has placed us in. Our desire is to have the world to submit themselves to our convenience. And I don't guess there's any way to note that any better in just what makes you angry, what upsets you. Anger comes out of the idea that my sense of ought has been violated. What is going on around me, whether by people or by circumstances or by trials, is upsetting me because it's not fitting in to my will and my lifestyle, and things are getting in the way of what I want to happen for me. It's a very self-centered emotion. So patience with joy is an entirely different matter. Patience with joy is recognizing that God is over all, and whatever I'm facing, God expects me to accept that and realize that it's for my good and that He's doing this for my good. There's two relationships that God pushes us in to that is helpful for our growth. Marriage is one. The church, a local church, is the other. I want you to think about just what God does when He pushes us into a marriage. And I say pushes us because He's placed those desires of companionship and all that is involved in marriage. He's pushing us to that direction. He even tells us it's not good that man should be alone. And He's created it that way. But what is the long-term effect of that? He said, I want you to come together in this relationship and you never, ever get to separate. What about when I'm so mad at her, I can't stand to be in the same house with her? And she's so mad at me, she can't stand to stay in that same house with me. What happens when I'm just thoroughly unhappy about this? What happens is He's pushed you into this situation to teach you, to cause you to grow. And if you quit and give up, you lost the lesson. And the same thing is true with us in the body, whether in a local church or us as a brotherhood of believers. We are being told that we have to be patient with one another. We are being told that we are not allowed to separate. And it always blows my mind how many Christians think that the first time they get their knickers in a knot, they can just run down the road to the next church and they'll just find someplace else and take their ball and go home. You're not allowed to do that. Who said you get to do that? The reason he's pushed us into this situation is because we need to grow in our character, and our character will not grow if we do not emphasize overcoming the trials and difficulties that go on between two sinful people or 100 sinful people that he's pushed into that relationship. And so patience with joy and not looking at things where if it violates my comfort zone, then I'm going to have a meltdown and everything has to go the way that I think it ought to work. And so he's emphasizing how important those things are. Notice that the New King James Version, I love how New King James translate this, including verse 12, enduring everything with patience while joyfully giving thanks. So you're going to endure people with patience while joyfully giving thanks. And you think, that's an oxymoron. That's just the, whoo. How do I do that? Because I need to be thankful that God is pushing me into learning how to love, learning how to be like him. And there's only one way to do that, and it's go through difficulties, go through trials. Paul in Romans chapter 5 says, we rejoice in tribulation, because tribulation produces endurance. And endurance produces a proven character. And a proven character produces hope. How are you going to get endurance? You're going to get it through tribulation. Well, can I just bypass that? I like Teresa, a number of years ago, she says, I learned one prayer that I'd just rather not pray anymore. Lord, give me patience and give it to me now. You know, that there you are. If you ask for patience, the Lord goes, oh, you want tribulation. Oh, well, that's because that's how you get it, honey. That's the way you're going to get there, is you're going to have to go through some difficulty. And whether you ask for it or not, the good Lord, as a father, is going to give it to you because he wants you to grow in this. So the trials that we go through, just even with each other, we need to give thanks for her joyfully because it's improving us instead of grumbling and griping about it. All right, with that being said, let's consider how God helps us reflect on his patience, reflect from it. And I'd ask you to turn over just a couple of pages from Galatians 5 to chapter 4 of Galatians in the first 3 verses. Now, let me just set this up in context just for a second. There's a reason for Ephesians chapter 1 through 3. And it is foundational to chapters 4 through 6. Chapters 4 through 6 are the easy part of the letter because he says, here's what I want you to do. But chapters 1 through 3 are telling us the reason why he wants us to walk worthy of our calling. And the reason is that the reason he created us was to be to the praise of his glory. Chapter 1 verse 6, chapter 1 verse 11, chapter 1 verse 14, everything God has done for us is to the praise of his glory. And then chapter 3, 10, and 11, everything God has done for us is to transform us so that we show the wicked rulers and authorities in the heavenly places God's manifold wisdom. We are God's exemplary creation that shows those evil rulers that they were totally wrong when they decided that God, your way isn't the best way, and we think we can do a better way. And so God uses us, the fact that we will love him no matter what happens to us, no matter if someone kills us, no matter if we go through whatever trial, it won't make any difference. We're going to love God. We're never going to give up on him. And that just pummels Satan. Because remember, Satan's argument with Job was the only reason people serve you is because you bribed them. You just give them goodies and they serve you for goodies. And we prove the opposite. We serve him because he's wonderful. Because he is, there's nothing like him and no one like him. And it destroys Satan. So our purpose then is not, okay, well, you're baptized, now you're a Christian, so you need to live a good life. Our purpose is to show the rulers and authorities in heavenly places God's manifold wisdom, His greatness by how we live. Patience is part of that. So now notice how he starts that. In chapter 4, 5, and 6, he says, here's how I want you to live so you'll be to the praise of God's glory. And the very first thing he does is chapter 4, 1, walk worthy of the calling to which you were called with all humility and gentleness, with patience, bearing with one another in love. Where does he start? Well, he starts with whether or not you're a sound congregation. No, it actually doesn't start there. He starts whether or not you're right on this issue or that issue. No, that's not where he starts. He starts on whether or not you in humility and gentleness are patient and loving and bear with one another in love. That's where he starts. That is foundational. And if that's not going on, ladies and gentlemen, we might as well throw the towel in. Because we could, as Paul said, let our body be burned. And we're nothing if we do not have love. And patience is part of that love. That's what he's asking us to do. So take a look at this a little more carefully now. Begins here with our patience. Patience here is also translated by other passages that have the idea of the opposite, long-suffering, the opposite of carrying anger. In fact, the word carries with it long-suffering. That word carries with it the idea of, is built on the word anger and rage. It's just doing the opposite of anger and rage. Now, you're aware of that, even if you didn't think about it this way. When God describes himself in Exodus 34 and he passes by Moses, he says, the Lord, full of mercy and slow to anger. Remember that? He calls himself slow to anger, or some versions, long suffering. God's being patient. Now, how do I learn that, and how I and you treat other people? Slow to respond in a way that creates problems between the two of us and gives that up. How easily we are angered by one offense. I always thought it was a bit funny when Jesus, we've all read this, and Peter comes to Jesus and says, Lord, how many times should I forgive my brother? And Jesus, up to 7 times. And Jesus, no, I say to you, 70 times 7. Well, Jesus didn't have to say 70 times 7. He could have just said 7 times, and we'd all failed anyway. I mean, by the 2nd or 3rd time, I'm done. I've had it. Right? We're just like, can you believe they did it again? The 2nd time. I can't imagine 7 times. And yet, Jesus is expressing in that patience with one another. We're not trying to enable sin. We're not trying to encourage sin. And it doesn't mean that a person doesn't need to be rebuked in a gentle way concerning what they're doing. None of that is true, but we don't give up. We don't give up on people. Love does not do that. Love is patient, Paul said. Love is kind, Paul said. So those are the things that we need to keep in mind. Notice the words bearing with one another. Bearing with one another, not expecting somebody to be perfect in maturity. We do that all the time with family members, but when it comes sometimes into the body, we're not bearing one another. We're expecting everybody to be at that same level that I've attained to. Just think about the long suffering of God. How long suffering has He been with you? If I were Him, I'd have thrown me away a long time ago. But He's been long suffering. Doesn't it always amaze you how long suffering God was with Israel? You start reading the Old Testament, you go, okay, Lord, look, really, we're done, right? We're done. They are horrible. They are not going to listen to you. Just take them out. Start another nation by Moses. And Moses is going, no. Let's not do that. And God is always listening and always changing, hoping to save a few more people. That's what we need to do. We're hoping to save somebody. We're hoping to save the very person that we believe is being unjustified in their actions and being horrible in how they're treated. But we forget that the end goal is to save this person. That's the idea. Remember Jesus saying to the apostles, Matthew 17, how long do I have to bear with you? And yet He did. Oh, you of little faith. And yet He bore with them. And by doing so, He produced these wonderful 12 men who turned the world upside down because He was patient with them. And He bore with them in their weaknesses. You ever noticed in 1 John chapter 4, or about chapter 5 and verse 16, when John said, if you see a brother sinning a sin not unto death, you shall pray for him and his sin shall be forgiven. So that's the first thing you think of, right? When somebody does something against you, first thing you think of is, let me pray for them that God will forgive them, because I know they're not the kind of person that is just intentionally rebelling against God. They're not sinning unto death. So let me pray that they'll be forgiven. Now, how are you going to go around grumbling about it? See, there's part of living like God asks us to live. One other thing here, notice the words in the bond of peace. And I know peace is another part of the fruit of the Spirit that they will be studying. But I want you to think about how He does this in patience, in love, with the bond of peace. That word bond is the same word in verse 1 that Paul translates or gives as prisoner. You're a prisoner of peace. You're shackled to peace. You're going to live your life among the brethren here, brethren throughout the world. You're going to live your life shackled to the primary goal of peace. How have we done with that? Well, most of us are older, would look around in our experience over the years in different places and said, it's been pretty sorry. It's been pretty sorry. And I personally am just absolutely scared to death of what God is going to do about us when we don't do better than that. You and I both know, He said very plainly in 1 John 4:20 and 21, do not say you love God whom you have not seen when you do not love your brother whom you have seen. We're in deep trouble when we do not do that. So let's get some practical things just in closing here, and how these practical occasions where we really need patience. The first is when we're teaching others. Most of us, if not all of us, but at least most of us, are not very acquainted with people who have grown up in horrible, horrible families. We grew up with maybe a mom and a dad and all of that, whereas we have a population now that in the neighborhood of 50% of the children and more are growing up without a dad, with a broken family, and without morality at all. We are to the point that way below 50% of the population, and especially the millennial population is in the 20 percentile, that even believe in the God of the Bible. So if you're ever wondering why things, all going to pot and morality going down, well, that's very simple. It's because most people have no knowledge of Scripture whatsoever and no respect for what the Scripture says. So what we have then is we have people growing up in that, and they have no idea what is moral or immoral and why you would say it was immoral. But when we have opportunities to teach these people, what is that going to require for us to do? It's going to require patience. And Paul talks about that. It's going to require respect. And it's required gentleness, 1 Peter 3 and verse 15. In 2 Timothy 2 in verse 24, he says the servant of God is to be gentle and patient and long-suffering, hoping that they will eventually be able to come to the truth and escape the shackles of the devil and what the devil is doing. That takes a lot of patience. And where it really takes patience is in our group. Because when you have an opportunity to teach somebody, or when somebody does respond and somebody shows up at our churches, how well do we handle a person who is completely different in the way their personality is, their thought process, because of the world they grew up in, and the way they're going to dress, and the way they're going to act within our group? All of those things need to be respected and carefully be patient in those situations. I'm afraid that possibly the reason we're kind of in a very narrow middle class group is because we don't handle well people that aren't within that narrow realm in our economic lifestyle. And we need to be very, very careful about that. Who did the Lord teach and befriend? Tax collectors and sinners. And when he uses the word sinner, he's talking about people who are absent of morality. And he hung out with them. And he did everything he could in order to save them. So Paul's patience, just think of his patience at Corinth. I doubt there's one of us that would have chosen, if we went into the Greek area of Achaia and we said, let's choose a church. Well, how about Corinth? Why don't we all go to Corinth? I'm not choosing Corinth. There's a bunch of sinners in that church. Yeah, we want a pristine church, but a pristine church is a dangerous church, because a pristine church doesn't want its purity and its pristine, nice, good-looking people to get messed up with somebody who is not in their class. When I was in San Diego, church at El Cajon, the members worked very, very hard in reaching out, getting Bible classes, and one particular year, one of the members told me this. I had no idea because I don't try to count, but one of the members told me that at some point toward about 9-month part of that year, he says, we've baptized well over 50 people this year. And I said, really? I said, well, that's fantastic. God's really blessed us. And in the midst of that, we had older members, and I hate to pick on the older ones because I am one, but we had older members that were not accustomed to that. And you could hear words going around, I don't like this. These people are messing up our church. And the elders actually had to stand up and caution the church about their attitude. By the way, many of those people, there are some of those people who are elders today and have just done fantastic. And most of them, as far as I know, most of them had stayed strong with the Lord. But the best thing we can do is mess up our church. That's exactly what the Lord wants to happen. He wants the church to be messed up in the sense of bringing anybody who is willing to come to the call of Christ. But it's going to require us to be gentle and patient and not be the kinds of people who are judgmental and expect somebody to have grown to our level in a matter of a short period of time. Very, very, very important that we maintain that. Secondly, we need to learn patience, obviously, in marriage. And I've mentioned that already. I won't say too much about it, except to say this. The way we tend to handle things when we're hurt in marriage, and when our happiness is being destroyed, and when we're feeling like this is not the reason I got married, why isn't this fun anymore? Why am I not, googly-eyed in love anymore, etc. And we get in that thing. And so what we tend to do is lash out. And there's two primary things that we tend to do when we lash out. First, we commit the sin of sinful anger. And that doesn't mean that we scream and yell necessarily. That's how some people would express their anger. They would raise their voice, they would scream and yell, and things like that. Others would have sinful anger by, like the husband who told me about his wife one time. He said, I did something wrong, and when I do that, and she just walks over to the calendar and goes, Saturday, 1:10 p.m. I'll be talking to you in 1 week. Just yell at me and get it over with, would you? So and what's interesting about those kinds of people, they're much better than everybody else because they didn't lose their temper. Everybody has their weapon. We all have a weapon, and God said we can't use the weapon. The thing of it is, when you use a weapon in your marriage, you are not only being impatient and not patient. You're not only being self-centered about this has to go my way, but you're shooting yourself in the foot. Because when you violate somebody else's heart by the way you respond to them, they are less likely to respond well to you, and they lose, as Willard Harley says in his book, Love Busters, they lose love units. You lose it in your account, and they're less likely now to respond to you. Now, how'd that go for you? Or making critical judgments about them, or selfish demands and things like this. Patience does not do that. Patience responds positively. That doesn't mean that you don't have a conversation about, by the way, you probably didn't mean it, but you say things that way, it really hurts me. It's okay to report your feelings. It's not okay to use other ways. And thirdly, it has to happen in the Lord's church. Paul said in 1 Thessalonians 5, verse 14, admonish the idle, encourage the faint-hearted, help the weak. Be patient with all. How many people? How many are we to be patient with? Everybody. Be patient with all. And that is so important that we remember that in the way we handle it. Look at these two final verses. I've always been struck with 1 Corinthians 6, verse 7. That's the passage in 1 Corinthians 6 where he says, don't have lawsuits toward one another. And we like to talk about, we're not allowed to have lawsuits. But do we talk about this part? Why not rather suffer wrong? Why not rather be defrauded? You have a difference with somebody, we go, oh no, I want my piece of flesh and I want to be right. No, why not rather be defrauded? A few years ago, I had a lady come up to me, and I hadn't seen her at Bible class, and I said, "Hey, I've been missing you at Bible class. You're one of the ones who says some of the greatest things in the class. I love to hear your ideas." She goes, "No, you don't." I said, "What? What?" And she says, "You called me stupid in front of everybody." I said, "Oh no. Oh, honey, I would never call you stupid. Why would I say such a thing? You're not stupid. You're very smart. You have good." She goes, "No, you did. You did. You called me stupid." And I said, "I'm sure I didn't. I can't believe, and there's no way that thought's never crossed my mind about you." "Oh no, you said it." Okay, which way can I go on that? How am I going to handle that? Am I sitting there and argue with her? You know where that's going to go. It's going to go anywhere. And I didn't want that to get any bigger than what it already was. And I said, you know, I'll tell you, I don't remember doing that, but if you said I did it, that's fine. I want to tell you, I am as sorry as I could ever be. Would you please forgive me? I cannot believe that I would have said such a thing, but if you think I did, I'll own it. And I am so sorry. Please, please forgive me. I need you, and we need each other. And then I went home and wrote a letter and sent it to her and her husband. Please understand, this is not in my heart. I want us to be right. And she said, wonderful, thank you. And that was that. And we're the best of friends today. Now, to this day, I can't imagine that. But it doesn't matter. Swallow it. Who cares? Better to be right with each other than to be right. That's what really we need. Look at Peter's statement in 1 Peter chapter 2:21. For to this end, or to this you have been called, because Christ also suffered for you, leaving you an example that you might follow in his steps. He committed no sin, neither was deceit found in his mouth. When he's reviled, notice it, he did not revile in return. When he suffered, he did not threaten, but continued entrusting himself to him who judges justly. Without patient endurance, we failed our calling. We have to have it in order to get to heaven. And it's something, folks, we just have to practice every day, every single day. And if you think that's hard, I know it's hard. That's a tough one to do. But we need to present that love. We're going to sing a song right now in a moment. And we urge you, maybe there's some here who are not right with God. If you have not done what you know you need to do to be right with God, we're certainly here to help you. And we hope that you will not delay that. It is never a good time to wait. So if you're subject to God's invitation in any way, please step forward while together we stand and while we sing.